With class-based and functional components, it's important to understand which kind of component can do what their history is, and what their future is. So class-based components, with that I simply mean components that extend that component object we can import from the React package. And functional components are simply these functions that take props and return some JSX code. Now, these components do differ when it comes to managing state and to something called lifecycle hooks, which we haven't had a look yet, but which we'll dive into in this section. Class-based components can access state and they can change it with setState, and they also can use these lifecycle hooks, as you will learn. Functional components, there it's a bit tricky. In the past, before React hooks were introduced, they couldn't manage state. But since React hooks were introduced, they can with the useState hook. So access to state is actually possible, but lifecycle hooks are still not supported. Functional components are way more powerful than they have been in the past, though. And the difference between class-based components and functional components, therefore, is way less strong than it used to be. It's important to note, though, that not every React project you might be working on will use the latest version of React. And therefore, it's still important to be aware of the fact that historically, state management could only be done in class-based components, and therefore you had to transform your components to class-based components if you wanted to access state. And actually, in this course, I will have that split where all components where I use state are class-based, and only towards the end or later down the course, I will also show you how to convert the entire course project we'll build to a hooks-based approach, simply because the majority of projects still use that class-based approach, and I want you to learn both approaches. Now, regarding the way we access state and also props, it's important to know that in class-based components, you need the this keyword, because state and props are properties of the component class. And we haven't used this props yet. We'll do so in this video still, but just keep that in mind. You need the this keyword there. In functional components, you get props as an argument, and therefore you can just use it like this, like a normal variable in your function. So when should you use what? When you're using a version of React that doesn't support React hooks, the answer is simple. When you're working with state or you need lifecycle hooks, use the class-based approach. If you're in a project that uses React hooks, it's less simple. You might want to use functional components only, but as we'll do in this course, you can also still split it to have a clear separation between components that are involved with state management and components that aren't. And as it's optimal to have as many presentational only components as possible, this might make it easier for you to keep that separation between stateful and stateless components. So use class-based components if you need to manage state or access to lifecycle hooks, and you don't want or you can't use React hooks. Use functional components in all other cases. So if you can use React hooks and you use the right versions of React and you want to use it, go functional and do your state management in there. And you will learn what replaces lifecycle hooks in this module too. If you are using an older version of React, then use functional components for all your presentational components. So all the components that only get inputs, props, and don't need to manage state. Now regarding that this state and this props thing, I haven't really shown you what I meant by that. Now, thus far, we only access this state. Here in the app.js file, we access this state to pass our state to the cockpit component, for example. Now, the app.js file here simply doesn't receive any props, or the app component doesn't receive any props. But we can change this. In our index.js file, we can, of course, send a prop into our app component, simply by setting it here. For example, our app title, our application title. That could be our person manager, because we're clearly managing some persons. So I'm sending this string on the app title prop into my app component. And now if I want to use it in there, I need to use the this keyword. So in app.js, I could now use this prop anywhere in here, but I actually want to forward it to the cockpit. So there, I'll add a title prop, and you could name this prop whatever you want. And if I now want to access the property of this app component, I do this on this, props, and then there it's app title. That was the name of the prop I set in the index.js file. And here I'm just passing that through to the cockpit. So in the cockpit, if I go there, I will now have that new title property, which I can use to output my title down there. So instead of hi, I'm a React app, I'll now output props.title. And here it's just props.title because this is not a class. Therefore, we don't need to use this to access the props. It's important to keep that difference in mind as well. With that, if we go back to our application, we see the person manager up there. The rest works as it did before.